was a terribly cold and snow-covered Thanksgiving in 1895 when 6 cars and their teams would pull up to race down the streets of Chicago. This would become the first race in American automotive history. If you'd like to learn more, sit back, buckle up, and get ready for Chrispy Driver Presents Deep Drives, the first race in American history. So calling this the first race may be a bit of a stretch. Surely there are a few people who wanted to test out their new toys against their neighbors. But this was the first official race held in America. The gentleman responsible for organizing the race was a man by the name of H. Colesat, a publisher who worked for the Chicago Times-Herald newspaper. Colesat really had some foresight. He believed that He believed that an organized race would truly create more interest in those newfangled horseless carriages. Remember, at this time, Ford had not begun pumping out tons of vehicles with his fancy pants assembly line. So in truth, there were a ton of manufacturers creating both gas-powered and electric vehicles. In fact, here is a list of quite a few that had patents at the time, and this was only a few years after the first vehicles were being produced in our country. So people weren't really excited for vehicles yet. In fact, most of the newspapers couldn't even decide what to call them. But Colesat saw the potential in hosting a race that would not only show off the speed of these vehicles, but their durability as well. However, the city wasn't quite ready. In fact, a couple of the drivers were stopped by police while driving their vehicles into the city. They were forced to rent horses in which to pull the vehicles because the police said they had no right to drive them within the city. So one of the first potholes, so to speak, for the race, and one of the reasons it was postponed from its intended date on November 2nd, was convincing the city leaders to allow them the right to travel within the city. Luckily, the Chicago Times-Herald's editors were successful and the race was scheduled for November 28th, Thanksgiving Day. The Chicago Times-Herald ran ads for the race, promising up to 83 vehicles to participate. However, when the day came, only 11 vehicles would make it to the race. Many of them were not completed, damaged in transit, or simply could not make it to the race due to the poor weather conditions. Of these 11, only 6 of the vehicles made it to the starting line in the horrible road conditions. One of the 5 remaining that made it to the race but not to the starting line was an electric vehicle whose battery had died due to the frigid temperature. Of the 6 vehicles to make it to the line, 3 vehicles were invented by the Carl Benz. The only other car, per se, to make it was Frank Duryea's motorized wagon. The other vehicles would be what we call today motorcycles, but they did not have the power to make it up one of the hills along the race route. The race was set to drive from the starting point at what is today's Chicago Museum of Science and Industry to the nearby Evanston and back. This would be a 54-mile round trip in total. In the snowy and cold weather, these vehicles would face their truest test.
Fun fact, Carl Benz's company would become Mercedes-Benz, and he happens to be credited with being the father of the car and the father of the automotive industry. So no big deal there.
The race began and immediately there were race-ending incidents. One of the Benz cars smashed into a horse and was unable to complete the race. As I mentioned before, the motorcycles were unable to make it up one of the steep grades. The Duryea, who had fallen behind at the beginning, made up time and passed the 2 Benzes on the return route. Frank Duryea would cross the line to win the race with a finishing time of 10 hours and 23 minutes, crushing his only competitor to finish the race. The other finisher, Hieronymus Mueller, by some accounts passed out from exhaustion during the race, and his umpire or co-driver, Charles Brady King, the first man to drive a vehicle inside of Detroit city limits, actually drove across the line. These were the only 2 vehicles to finish the race.
Fun fact, King was followed on this first Detroit drive in the cold and snow by a 32-year-old on a bicycle, one Henry Ford.
Even though only 2 vehicles completed the race, it was a rousing success by Colesat standards. Newspapers across the country began to spread the story, many of them speaking of the coming end of the era of horse travel. This sped up the rate of which automobile industry developed in such a way that it put it 5 years ahead. Commercial production would begin only a year after the race. This race was iconic for many reasons. Not only did it start the frantic race to invent the next transportation standard, but it set the standard for racing in the future. It showed that a race was not only great for promoting the vehicles that were driving it, but also great for promoting the sales of the news itself. It also led to the creation of the first Automotive Club. Created by Charles King, the club would later elect Charles Duryea as its president. The finishing vehicles were both given to the Smithsonian Institute. The winning car, the Duryea, was destroyed, however, due to a misunderstanding. The second place car, however, does still exist and is on display in the Mueller Museum in Decatur, Illinois.
I know it was a shorter video today, but I thought the story was just too cool not to share. If you like this video, let me know by hitting that like button and comment down below what other stories you might like to hear. If you subscribe, just know that I appreciate it. But until next time, this has been Chrispy Driver, and have yourself a wonderful day!